Hey, we are live. What is up, fight nerds and dirty gamblers? I am Erik, and this is Erik Bets Fights. Welcome to my full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 57, headlined by Arman Tsarukyan versus Mateusz Gamrot. I am going to do the full card this week. The last couple of weeks, sometimes I've only been doing the main card. Basically, I've bitten off a lot content-wise. I'm doing 5 shows a week now, so sometimes I just kind of run out of time and have to squeeze things in. I am going to do the full card this week, but I am once again under the gun a little bit time-wise, so I'm not going to go into like super detail on some of the fights. When I go into full detail, these breakdowns end up being like 90 minutes to 2 hours, and I'm trying to keep it to more like an hour today, so we're not going to go too crazy. Normally I do start off with a recap of my bets from the last event. I had a ton of bets, so to save time, I'm going to skip that. I will let you know that we lost. It was a losing event. We were down 2.36 units on the Kattar versus Emmett event. If you do want to take a look at my bets for that event, you can always look at my tracked record at betmma.tips/Erik Block, and that's spelled ERIKBLOCK. You should also be able to find the link for that in the description of the video down there. It'll say third-party tracked bets or something like that. So if you do want to take a look at my bets from that card or any card, they're all third-party tracked right there on that website. But yeah, it was a losing event, but I'm not going to go through all the bets. We're going to go ahead and just jump into the breakdowns for UFC Vegas 57 this weekend. It's a pretty fun card, not a ton of name value for more casual fans. Like, this is one of those where, if you're a casual fan, you might not even recognize the top 2 names, in the main event. But hardcore fans, we know that those guys, Tsarukyan and Gamrot, are both excellent prospects and excellent fighters, and I think it should make for a great fight. And there are quite a few fights on this card that, though they may lack name value, I think they should be a good time. How many times do we see it happen where, a card that is not a pay-per-view and doesn't have a lot of name value ends up being, more exciting and more fun than the cards that do have a lot of name value. So, because, when you've got those lower down fighters, sometimes they're really fighting to make a statement, kind of like when you go to a regional show and you see crazy finishes because people are just out there trying to get it done. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this. Hopefully I've got these in the right order. I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes they change the order, but I've got Jinh Yu Frey versus Vanessa Demopoulos as the first fight of the night. Let's see, betting odds on that one. Jinh Yu Frey, pretty big favorite at -255. Comeback on Vanessa Demopoulos +235. I'm going to be honest with you and let you know that I haven't done the tape on this fight yet. I'm a little bit behind on my tape study. I think this is the only fight that I haven't taped yet. But I did actually find a bet that I like on this fight already, even though I haven't taped it. I bet the Vanessa Demopoulos scorecards no action at +190. And what that bet is, if you've never made one of those bets, it means the scorecards no action bet means if Vanessa Demopoulos wins inside the distance, the bet pays at +190. If the fight goes to decision, regardless of who wins, if the fight goes to decision, it's a wash and I get my money back. So the only way that I lose the bet is if Jinh Yu Frey wins inside the distance. And the reason I was willing to take that bet is I don't think that's a terribly likely outcome. I do lean Frey to win here. I do lean Frey to win by decision. And if that happens, then it's just a push and I get my money back. So I do think Frey is the better striker. I think she's the better fighter overall. I think she's the better wrestler. If it plays out on the feet, I think Frey's going to get the better of it, but I don't think she's likely going to be able to finish Demopoulos. If Frey does decide to wrestle, I think she can have success there. And the reason I was willing to go with the scorecards and no action on Vanessa Demopoulos is that she's very active off of her back. She's very good at hunting submissions off of her back. So if Frey does look to wrestle here, and we see Demopoulos spending quite a bit of time on her back looking for those subs, she could find an armbar or a triangle. So I actually like that bet quite a bit. Because yeah, I do think the fight probably goes to decision. I do think Frey probably wins, but if that happens, we get our money back. And if Demopoulos finds that sub, pays at +190. So that's what I went with on that one. Next fight up, we've got Mario Bautista versus Brian Kelleher. Kind of a up-and-comer versus vet sort of fight here. Trying to find the betting odds for you. Bautista, yeah, decent-sized favorite at -161. Come back on Kelleher +145. I'm going to throw a couple stats at you here. Mario Bautista is 3-2 in the UFC with 2 decision wins and 1 TKO win, and both of his losses are by finish. One is an armbar and one is a KO. Kelleher is 8-6 in the UFC and has only gone to decision 5 times in those 14 fights, which I thought was interesting. So overall, these guys have 19 UFC fights, and they've only gone to decision a combined 7 times. So their fights are finishing 63.2% of the time. So that's kind of something to keep in mind as we look at betting this. If you're interested in looking at the doesn't go the distance or the unders or something like that, these guys' fights are finishing 63.2% of the time. I'd like to see Kelleher look to wrestle here, but it's hard to trust him to do that. I'm going to throw some stats at you for Kelleher with his wrestling as well. The numbers do suggest a trend in that direction. Obviously, his last fight was the Umar Nurmagomedov fight, if I'm not mistaken. He didn't really have a chance to do much in that fight, so we're going to not count that one as far as looking at the wrestling stats, because he just kind of got blown out of there. But he landed 6 takedowns on 8 attempts against Kevin Kroom. And he landed 3 takedowns on 3 attempts against Domingo Pilarte. And he's only landed 16 total takedowns on 40 attempts in all 14 of his UFC fights. So 56% of his total takedowns landed came in just those 2 fights versus Kroom and Pilarte. So, and before that, he'd never landed more than 1 takedown in any of his previous 11 UFC fights. So he's never landed more than 1 takedown for 11 UFC fights in a row. Then all of a sudden he goes 3 for 3 and 6 for 8, and then loses to Umar. So we're not going to, and that was in the first round, I think. So we're not going to count that one. But, but those last 2 fights before Umar, we see him trending toward attempting more takedowns and getting more takedowns. So, maybe sometimes we see fighters, especially as they age. He's 35 now, which is pretty old for the smaller weight classes. We see fighters sometimes as they age, they realize they have to adjust their style a little bit to make it work. Look at Andrei Arlovsky, for example. He's a guy who used to get a ton of knockouts. He used to get a ton of finishes when he was younger, and now he almost always goes to decision. He got knocked out a bunch of times. He had to find a new way. He had to find a new way to fight where he was, he was a little more tentative, a little more defensively sound, where he wasn't going to get knocked out. It doesn't lead to him finding finishes very often, but it also doesn't lead to him getting finished very often. So, he changed his style to make it work for an older fighter. Maybe that's what we're seeing here with Kelleher. I'm kind of just guessing, but he is 35 years old, and it does appear that he's looking to go to his wrestling more often. So I do hope that we see that trend continue here, because I think on the feet, Bautista's quite a bit bigger guy. Bautista's 3 inches taller and has 5 inches of reach. So on the feet, it could end up looking a little bit like the Kroom fight. Kroom was getting the better of the striking there with just better output, and just because he's the longer guy. Overall, I kind of do lean Bautista in this fight, just for the obvious advantages that he has. He has advantages in size, in reach, and output, and age. He's only 28 to Kelleher's 35. But Kelleher's a wily vet, and he has a massive experience edge, and he's one of those guys who's been in there with everybody and kind of seen it all. Even though I'm kind of leaning Bautista a little bit, it's not by much, and that's not like a super confident read on my part, And so I haven't bet anything, but one thing that stood out to me was Kelleher by decision at plus 400. If you, like I said, these guys' fights are finishing quite a bit of the time, but if it does go to a decision, I could certainly see Kelleher ending up taking that decision, and at plus 400, I think that could potentially be a good bet. So that's not on my betting slate at the moment, but don't be shocked if it shows up there, because I don't mind that spot. Next up, we've got Cody Durden versus JP Bays. Durden is 1-2-1 in the UFC, with his last fight being that super quick loss to Muhammad Mokaev. Bays is 0-2 in the UFC, and then he also has 1 win on the Contender Series. I'm going to keep this breakdown pretty short. JP Bays does seem to have some chin issues. I don't know the exact number, but he got knocked down like 5 times in his 2 UFC fights, maybe 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, somewhere in there. But it was quite a few anyway. I think it was 4 minimum anyway. But excuse me. Durden does Durden tends to come out hard. I always forget I have a mute button. I didn't have to subject you guys to that. Durden tends to come out hard and aggressive in round 1, looking for a finish. Which he'll tend to have a good round 1, but he also will tend to slow down a little bit, because I think he kind of blows his wad a little bit in round 1 there. I do think Durden should be able to get takedowns on Bays, and even if he can't keep him down, he does do a pretty good job of keeping that body lock. I like those fighters who, not just will chain wrestle to get the takedown, but they'll even chain wrestle once they get the takedown. The kind of fighters that they get their guy down. When their guy gets back up, they've still got the body lock. They're working against the cage. They're looking for the trip. They drag him back down again. They get back up. They hold that, and Durden's a guy who will look to do that. Excuse me one second. So I do like Durden too. And, you know, Baze is a solid wrestler too, but I think Durden's probably the better wrestler here. And I also think, you know, since we've seen Baze get knocked down quite a bit, I do think he might have some chin issues. Durden does hit pretty hard. I think, you know, I guess it wouldn't shock me to see Durden potentially even catch Baze early and finish him. But even if he can't do that, it's one of those fights where I sort of like, if it plays out for all 3 rounds, I sort of see it as one of those fights where I think Durden's going to win the first round because he's a quick starter and Baze really isn't. But Durden does tend to gas himself out if he can't find that finish. So I think Baze will likely end up winning the 3rd round. So it could be one of those fights that comes down to who wins the 2nd round. You know, if we do see Durden tire, at what point is he tired enough that he's not winning the fight anymore? Does it happen in the beginning of the 2nd round, toward the end of the 2nd round? You know, so I don't know. So yeah, I don't have a strong lean here. This is a fight that I was seeing as pretty close. You know, I was maybe willing to lean Durden at like 60% or so at the most, I guess. And I forgot to pull up the lines here, didn't I? It's super, super close. JP Baze at -112, Durden at +105. So I did actually bet a little bit on Durden here. Not that I'm super confident in him to win, but because the line was pretty close to a 50-50 and I do favor Durden a little bit, I was willing to take that shot. So I did take a bet on Durden here, but this could also be a spot where, you know, a potential live bet spot. If Durden does have a great round 1, you know, maybe we would see Baze start to take over. So maybe a live bet on Baze could make sense at that point. My cat is standing over here trying to get in. So just one second. Okay. The beauty of doing these shows as a live stream, right? All right, I'm just going to leave the door open so he can come and go as he pleases. All right, I think we were pretty much, yeah, I was pretty much done breaking that one down anyway. Yeah, not super confident, but I did bet Durden, but I would potentially look to bet Baze live as the fight goes on, especially if we see Durden starting to slow down. Next up, we've got Raulian Paiva versus Sergey Morozov. Paiva is 3-3 in the UFC with 1 win on the Contender Series. Morozov is 1-2 in the UFC. This is another fight where I've got. Oh, I should give you the odds here quick too, shouldn't I? Morozov favored at -135. Paiva small underdog at +125. This is a fight I've gone back and forth on. I'm still not super confident in a read or a pick here. You're going to hear me say that a lot. That's just my nature. You know, I've had people on Twitter kind of get on my case about like, how come you never make confident picks, man? And it's like, because I'm not going to pretend to be confident when I'm not. Like, I have a really logical brain. I don't tend to get too caught up on emotional connections with fighters and that sort of thing. I'm kind of a Spock person. Like, I'm very logical instead of emotional. And so I feel like when you're super confident in a fighter to win, I mean, unless it's a situation like, okay, a fight like Valentina Shevchenko versus Lauren Murphy, where she was like -1100. Okay, it makes sense to be super confident in a win there. But when it's a fairly close fight, when somebody is super confident in somebody to win, to me, that's a little bit of a red flag that they're allowing their emotions to cloud their judgment a little bit. And so when people get on my case about like never making a confident pick, it's like, it's because I'm not confident. So I'm not going to pretend that I am, because I am so logical. I'm always kind of hung up on all the things that can go wrong. I'm like, you know, even though this fighter might have this advantage, this advantage, this advantage, I've been watching this sport for a long time and crazy things happen all the time. So I want to be like aware of those things. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent there, but not super confident to read on this fight. This is a fight I've thought about quite a bit. I've been going back and forth. Here are my thoughts on it. Paiva showed in the Kyler Phillips fight that he has the dog in him, right? Like, he can be a junkyard dog. He can survive and even thrive in a fight that gets, like an ugly, high-paced kind of brawl. That was the kind of fight that, if you're a fighter who doesn't have that dog in you, if you're a fighter who's not going to fight for someone's money, that's the kind of fight that can sort of take it out of you. That sort of fight can affect your spirit, right? And Paiva showed that he can thrive in that kind of fight. Whereas I think Morozov might be a little bit of a front runner. In the Douglas Silva de Andrade fight, and I do want to throw out there that I bet Douglas Silva de Andrade in that fight at like +180, +190. So I was excited to see how that fight played out. But Morozov absolutely destroyed Douglas Silva in round 1, right? destroyed him. But then when round 2 started and Douglas Silva de Andrade came out and started getting the better of Morozov a little bit, if you look closely at Morozov in round 2, I'm not a body language expert or anything, but you could see him getting discouraged. His body language changed completely from round 1 to round 2. When he realized, I've given this guy my best and I wasn't able to get him out of there, and now he's coming at me and he's getting the better of me. Morozov he became timid, he became tentative, he became discouraged. And so even though I do think Morozov is probably the better fighter here, skill-wise, and it wouldn't shock me if Morozov was able to find an early finish here even, but if he can't, I think Paiva has that dog in him. I think Paiva has that quality that's gonna discourage Morozov a little bit. He's not able to get him out of there. If he's like, I've thrown my best at this guy, it hasn't worked. He's still here. He's still coming at me. Well, what is this guy made of? What can I do to finish him? I think if that happens, Paiva might take over and Morozov might start to fold a little bit. So right now, I can't remember if I pulled the odds up on this. Yeah, I did. Paiva is a small underdog at plus 125. I haven't bet this fight yet, but if Paiva were to get up to and I don't know that we're going to see more. I'm not usually that great at predicting line movement anyway. I don't know that we're going to see line movement too much on this fight. Probably we won't. But if Paiva were to get up to plus 140, plus 150 range, I might take a shot on him. But like I said, I'm not going to right now because I do think Morozov is probably the better fighter. So if I were to bet Paiva, it would be based on that. If Morozov throws everything but the kitchen sink at Paiva and isn't able to get him out of there, are we going to see Paiva start to take over and Morozov start to fade a little bit as far as his confidence? So that's kind of my read on that fight overall. Next up, we've got TJ Brown versus Shah Yalan Nurdanbeke. This fight's at 145. If I'm not mistaken, I think TJ Brown is coming down from 155 for the first time. I don't know if it's the first time in his whole career, but sometimes guys fight at smaller weight classes when they're younger. I'm not sure if he's possibly fought at 145 before, but this will be him coming down. He's fought at 155 for a while anyway. So one thing that stood out to me here stats wise is Shah Yalan throws only 3.7 significant strikes per minute and lands only 1.1. Very, very low. The guy he can be really inactive and he doesn't really throw strikes. The main points I want to talk about on this fight, this is going to be a pretty short breakdown as well. I think TJ's more aggressive. He pressures more. Like I said, Shah Yalan can be pretty inactive on the feet. So on the feet, I think we're going to see TJ definitely having the better optics. Even if Shah Yalan is landing when he throws, I think TJ is going to be more aggressive. He's going to pressure more. He's going to be throwing more. It's just going to look better to the judges overall. These guys are both good wrestlers and grapplers, but I lean toward thinking TJ might have the slight edge in those areas as well. I'm not super confident on this one, but I like TJ to pressure, to land the better strikes, to potentially dictate the wrestling as well. Will he find a finish? I don't know. I forgot to pull up the odds here for you again, didn't I? TJ Brown's pretty big favorite at minus 210. Shah Yalan at plus 180. Those odds make sense to me, I guess, for the most part. I think TJ's probably just kind of the better fighter everywhere here, and he's a pretty good athlete as well. Like I said, I think he'll land more strikes, probably land the better strikes. I lean toward thinking TJ's going to be the better wrestler as well. Shah Yalan might prove me wrong there, but Shah Yalan did, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he get taken down by Sean Soriano? I think Shah Yalan is not. I guess one way to look at it is Shah Yalan was a solid wrestler on the Asian scene, but that's kind of different when you come over to America. Being a solid wrestler on the Asian wrestling scene or the Asian mixed martial arts scene, it's kind of the same as we've seen over time with, they've started to catch up, but it's kind of the same as we saw, in the earlier days with fighters from the UK, the wrestling level, fighters from Europe in general, well, from lots of parts of the world, really. Like America is like a spot where we, wrestling is kind of like in Japan, like kids are taking judo in school when they're 8 years old and stuff, wrestling is kind of a religion in American schools, right? Wrestling's a big thing here. So our fighters tend to be higher level wrestling wise. So if you're a fighter who is a high level wrestler in China, that doesn't necessarily dictate to high level wrestling in the US. And I think that's kind of what we've seen here. Is Shah Yalan is a guy who's who is a good wrestler on paper, but it doesn't hold up necessarily against solid wrestlers from the American scene. So I think that is what we could see here. I do think that line mostly makes sense. I don't mind TJ Brown. I don't know that he's a fighter I super trust at this point. I mean, he's a guy who can make mistakes. He's solid, but he's not without his flaws. But I'd potentially feel comfortable putting him in a parlay here. Some risk to it, but I do think he's probably the better fighter everywhere. Next up, we've got Tufan Nchukwi versus Carlos Ulberg. I was just going to say this should be a fun one, but actually, given some of the performances that we've seen from both of these guys lately, it might not be a fun one. It has the potential to be a lot of fun. It also has the potential to be a total slog, but I don't know. Tufan Nchukwi obviously he's a powerhouse of a human being. I mean, just look at the guy. If he hits you, it's a problem. However, he's pretty flat-footed and he can be pretty low volume. And let me give you the odds. I always forget to do that. Currently, Ulberg, I think this one is flip-flopped a little bit, but they've stayed pretty close. Currently, Ulberg is minus 115, Tufan Nchukwi plus 100. So they've stayed right around that 50-50 range, I think. It might have flipped back and forth, but I'm not positive. But yeah, Nchukwi he's very powerful, but he doesn't always throw a lot. He can be pretty flat-footed. He doesn't always use movement a lot. Like he doesn't always he doesn't use lateral movement. So like he'll spend time right in front of his opponent. He's kind of there to be hit. He does tend to throw single strikes, especially like early in the fight. He will tend to kind of come alive a little more and get more aggressive and start throwing combos later in the fight, but he'll tend to start kind of slow and just throw single strikes and feel it out. He does put up a nice defensive shell when his opponent comes forward with strikes. He'll actually shell up and do his best to not get hit. Like I said, he's a physical powerhouse, just a big, strong guy. So he's a guy who can be, difficult to control in the clinching and the wrestling and that kind of thing. Just, if nothing else, just because of his physical strength. I do think Tufan's best path to victory here is to make it ugly, to look to clinch, to look to push Ulberg against the cage, to look to take him down. Ulberg's the kind of guy that obviously he's a high level kickboxer. If you go out there and have a kickboxing match with him, and he's huge for the division too. The guy's 6'4" to Tufan's 6 foot. I've got their reaches down as even here. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but if this plays out on the feet at range as a kickboxing match, that's probably not great for Tufan. Tufan can always land that big one, but Ulberg is going to be the better technical kickboxer and is probably going to be able to piece him up at distance. So, I think Tufan's best bet here is to get inside, to make it ugly, to look to cage push and that sort of thing. Ulberg can be tough to hit because of his movement, though. He moves really well for a big guy, and he does seem to have a decent chin. Ulberg did gas really badly in his fight with Kennedy Nzechukwu. He did gas out really bad in that. He was winning the early going, and then he just kind of gassed out. But then in the fight after that against Fabio Cherant, it was almost like he overcompensated. He barely threw anything. He was really, really tentative. He was really, really reserved and conservative with his approach because he didn't want to gas out, probably. So, hopefully we'll see him kind of find a happy medium between those two approaches in this fight. Like he experienced gassing out because he went too hard, and then he experienced having a kind of a flat performance because he was afraid to gas out, and now maybe he'll end up somewhere in the middle. We're guessing a little, but and overall, it's risky overall, but I did end up putting a bet on Carlos Ulberg here. Like I said, I think Tufan has a path to victory by making it ugly, by clinching and wrestling. But Ulberg has shown a decent ability in the clinch. I don't think he's gonna prove that he's a high level wrestler or grappler or anything. But he's obviously training MMA. He's not just a kickboxer now. He can handle himself okay. He can get up, that sort of thing, and he looks pretty good in the clinch. So I did end up putting a bet on Carlos Ulberg here. Not super confident, and it won't surprise me, like I'm usually not. It won't surprise me if Nchukwi comes through here, but I did take the stab on Ulberg as just the better striker, the better athlete, the quicker athlete. So we'll see how that one goes. Excuse me. Next up, we've got the Action Man. Who doesn't love the Action Man, right? Chris Curtis versus Rodolfo Vieira. What a fun matchup, right? What a weird matchup. I love it. Chris Curtis favored a little bit at -130. Come back on Rodolfo Vieira at +130. This is a fight this is probably the fight I've thought about the most as this week has gone on. It's a really tough one to feel confident in, I think. I'll throw some stats at you here. Curtis does have 100% takedown defense in the UFC so far. He's credited with defending 3 takedown attempts from Phil Hawes and 3 attempts from Brendan Allen. However, if you watch the Hawes fight, those weren't real takedown attempts. And I'm, not to take anything away from Curtis, but I think it's just important to, he has 100% takedown defense. I don't believe that Phil Hawes legitimately attempted any takedowns in that fight, even though he was credited with 3. Because if you watch the fight, what Hawes did was, I think he's doing that thing where he's just trying to get his opponent to think about the takedown. He changes levels, he gets in on the hips, and then he just lets go and goes back to striking. He doesn't even, I don't even know, he might not even make contact completely on all of them. I can't remember for sure, but he basically just changes levels, and as soon as he's in on the takedown, he comes back up. So I think he's just making him think about that. So I don't think those were legit attempts. Well, where was I here? Obviously the striking stats are going to favor Curtis on paper, but I put in my notes here, I attribute that at least somewhat to how their fights have played out. I can't remember what I meant by that exactly, but I put that in my notes. Vieira has spent a lot of time in grappling positions. In the Stoltzfus fight, he attempts 41 and 46 strikes in the first 2 rounds respectively, so he's attempting 8 to 9 strikes per minute. Vieira has taken down all 4 of his UFC opponents at least twice, and has landed a total of 12 takedowns in those 4 UFC outings. So he's averaging 3 takedowns per fight, and he's taken down all of his UFC opponents at least twice. Sometimes I type stuff in my notes here, and then as I'm reading it, I can't remember what I meant by that exactly. But anyway, like I said, this is a tough fight to break down. It's a pretty clear striker versus grappler type of matchup. We've seen Curtis, and I don't know how to break down this fight without, I don't want to disrespect Chris Curtis at all, because I love the action man. Who doesn't? He's awesome. I mean, what a great Cinderella story type thing, right? He's a guy who was grinding on the regional shows forever and ever and ever. Always kind of getting close to the UFC, never quite getting there. I think he retired. I think he might have even retired twice, because he reached the point where he was like, I'm not going to get to the UFC and whatever. And then he finally got there, and then he's gotten 2 impressive knockouts over pretty solid competition, and so and I'm not trying to take anything away from Chris Curtis, but there's a part of me that thinks the outcome of his 2 UFC fights has been impressive, but how he got there hasn't. He was losing both of those fights pretty handily before finding that moment, and those kinds of fighters who come into the UFC and have those kinds of results, it always just reminds me, it harkens back to all of the times that those kinds of things have happened before. Like if we look at a fighter like Johnny Walker, Johnny Walker was the next big thing because he came in and blew people out early. If we go way back when to Houston Alexander, he came in and won 2 fights in the UFC super quickly and then ended up to really not be that good. If we go over to Pride, we look at Sokoju, he came in and he knocked out Little Nog and Ricardo Arona, and it was like, whoa, who's this guy? He just finished 2 really solid contenders, and then he ended up really not being that good. I'm a big believer that we really don't learn that much from a fighter getting a quick knockout. And I guess Curtis's knockouts, they weren't both super quick, immediately or something, but he found that moment. And I feel like we learned the least from seeing that kind of fight. Whereas I feel like a lot of fans and a lot of bettors, people put so much stock in that. They put more stock in oh, this guy's coming out and wrecking people. Okay, yes, but what are we seeing? We haven't seen how he's going to do against these people when the fight goes long. Obviously, if you dig into Chris Curtis's regional footage, the guy's got 30 some pro fights, so there's plenty of other fights you can look at. He definitely has fought late, but now that he's against UFC level competition, things could be different. So again, I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I'm just I'm not a person who reads a ton into okay, he's gotten two knockouts, because what if he doesn't find that knockout? He can be kind of inactive. Is he going to win a decision? Look at both the Hawes fight and the Allen fight. He was on his way to losing those fights, right? He was getting, especially against Hawes, he was getting absolutely picked apart and pieced up. But anyway, I feel like people are going to rip me apart in the comments I'm talking shit on Chris Curtis, and I promise I'm not. I love the guy, but I just have concerns about him. He does have solid takedown defense. I talked a little bit about how those Haas takedowns were not legit, but we've seen him defend takedowns in his regional fights as well. And we've also seen if Vieira is aggressively going for takedowns and not getting them, we've seen him gas out pretty badly. He did, was his last fight was Dustin Stoltzfus, right? He didn't gas out in that fight. So hopefully he's kind of learned his lesson a little bit, but he also was more willing to strike in that fight. Because I'm thinking anyway, that Vieira has realized, you know what? If I really, really push the wrestling hard early and I'm not able to get it, I tire out. So if I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong, I always have trouble remembering the exact details, but in the Stoltzfus fight, he pretty much willingly struck for the whole first round. And my thoughts on that were it was because he was intentionally trying to conserve his gas tank. And he's not a terrible striker. I mean, Vieira is not one of those grapplers who looks like a complete fish out of water on the feet. He's no K1 champion, but he's solid enough on the feet. He can strike. But, that's probably not going to be a really smart way to approach fighting Chris Curtis, right? The more time you spend on your feet against Chris Curtis, the more chance he's going to find that one. And he only needs, a short, tight little hook. He doesn't need a huge shot. He doesn't need a whole lot of space. He can get you with that little hook and finish it. So, I'm kind of all over the place with this breakdown because, like I said, I've thought about this fight a lot, and I don't really know where to go with it exactly. But so yeah, like Vieira has shown he's not afraid to mix it up on the feet, and I don't think that's going to be a good idea for him here. But then there's also the concern that if he pushes the wrestling, maybe he's going to gas out. So I don't know how he's going to approach this fight exactly or what he's thinking. But I think his best bet is to come out and look to push the wrestling and the grappling early. He might struggle to get a takedown on Curtis a little bit, early, but if he really works hard, like I said, he's taken down every UFC opponent he's had so far at least twice. So, I do think he might struggle to get Curtis down, but I do think he can get him down, especially if he's chaining it and just working, if he keeps working for that takedown. But then, like I said, then we get into the territory of him potentially gassing out. But then it becomes, if Vieira can get Curtis down, is it a wrap? Obviously Vieira he's the black belt hunter. There's levels to this. He's not just a black belt. He's the black belt who finishes other black belts. The guy is obviously a fantastic jiu-jitsu player and submission grappler. So, yeah, I keep going back and forth. I don't know where to go with this one. After doing the tape on this fight, I considered it pretty close to 50-50 because I kept thinking like, man, I can see how it plays out for Curtis. I can see how it plays out for Vieira. So then when I looked at the odds and saw that Vieira was at plus 140, not a huge dog, but there's a little bit of meat on that bone. I decided to take a shot on him. And I also kind of kept coming back to the idea that like, how would this fight be lined if it was booked a year ago? If it was booked before Chris Curtis's 2 UFC fights? Would Rodolfo Vieira be like a minus 800 favorite or something? And not that the lines are always right, but I just keep thinking like, yeah, Chris Curtis came in and he did some impressive things in those 2 fights, but Rodolfo Vieira he's just so high level with his jiu-jitsu. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, that was probably not a real solid breakdown, and I was kind of all over the place on that one. But yeah, I did end up taking a shot on Vieira at plus 140. But this is another spot where, if you've got access to live betting, this is potentially another great live bet spot. Because if Vieira comes out, if he does have success with the wrestling, but he's not able to get Chris Curtis out of there in round 1, then I think we start to see things swing Curtis's way. So it's, for live betting, it's always nice if one fighter wins the first round, especially if they win it pretty convincingly, then you're going to get a better line on the other fighter, obviously, because like, hey, they're down in this fight, they're losing. But if you happen to know how those fighters fight and that the one who just won the first round tends to be a little bit of a gas bag and the other one tends to be one who comes a little bit more alive as the fight goes on, then that's a good live betting spot. So I would potentially target this as a live betting spot. Okay, next up, we got 5 fights left. Next up, we've got cousin Umar Nurmagomedov versus Nate Maynes. Let's see. Looking at my notes here. Oh, I put in my notes, as a guy who grew up studying karate and competing in sports sparring tournaments, or in point sparring tournaments, sorry, I'm a big fan of fighters who bring flashy kicks. Like I love cousin Umar's kicks. He's got that rad question mark kick. He's got a super quick like hook kick that he does. I think that's fun to watch. Umar also has great takedowns. He's got a super fast back take. You know, like he can take a fighter down and transition to their back, like kind of in the same motion. Like he can shoot the takedown, and before they're even all the way on the ground, he's like on the back already. It's pretty impressive. He's also really good at timing a takedown when his opponent loads up on a strike. And I love to see that. Umar's one of those fighters who can make that read super quickly that a fighter is really loading up on something, because when you really load up on a strike and you're putting your all into it, that's when, you know, you're tensed up, you're coming forward, all of your momentum is going forward, and you're open to somebody changing levels and just shooting your legs out from under you. And Umar is really good at that, just timing that and just boom, taking your legs out from under you. Nate Maness, he's a good sized guy for the division. He will have a size and reach advantage here. Maness can be kind of flat-footed in the stand-up. He's not afraid to he's not at all afraid to trade in the pocket, and he does tend to keep his chin high and his hands low, which I don't love to see. But one thing that, you know, definitely stood out to me here doing the tape on this was Johnny Munoz was able to take Nate Maness down and get to his back, and also like get to mount. Like they did some. I'm having trouble remembering how it played out exactly, but I know there, you know, a fair amount of grappling happened early in that fight, and Munoz was able to pretty much like get to his back and then get to mount. Like he was able to do some floating on top between different positions. And I think if Munoz can do that, then I think cousin Umar can certainly do that too. And then also, if you look at the fact that Nate gets saved by the bell at the end of round 1 in both the Tony Gravely fight and the Johnny Munoz fight, you know, we can't know for sure, but we can argue that if either of those first rounds had gone another like 10 or 15 seconds, Maness might have been finished in both of those fights. He was, you know, in a bad position, getting beat up, and was close to being finished. So I do lean toward thinking Umar should be able to finish Nate Maness here, but the price is absolutely atrocious. I'd forgotten to pull that up. The very best price you can get out there for Umar is -833, and that's on Bet365. But he's more like up at -1,000 to even -1,200 in spots. Comeback on Nate Maness is +650. So I do think Umar can win here. He can probably get the finish. I would maybe look at, you know what? I'll even pull it up and look. I think I did look at it, and I think it was not plus money. But I would maybe look at Umar inside the distance. Let's see. Sorry, I hate doing this live when I don't know where the heck it is. Yeah, sorry, I'm not seeing that line right now. But yeah, Umar inside the distance is something I would potentially look at. I feel like it was at like -130 or something like that. You know, I don't love not getting plus money on a prop, but you know, when you're looking at a fighter that's -1,000, -1,200, and is probably going to find the finish, that makes sense. I am a little bit of a dog hunter, you know, when I see, just because I'm always very aware of all the weird things that can happen. Like I bet Mike Jackson against Dean Barry. I bet Mike Jackson at +750. I thought Dean Barry was the better fighter. I thought Dean Barry was likely to win, but it's like when you've got two low-level fighters like that where weird things can happen, I'm willing to take a shot at 750. And guess what? Something weird happened, and we got the win. So, you know, when you've got a guy who is a solid fighter, it's not like Nate Maness is a scrub. You get him at +650, which is what, like 13% implied, and the line might get even juicier than that. Like, I'm the kind of guy that I may end up taking a shot on Nate Maness here, especially like if he gets up, you know, if I get a shot on him up closer to, like, you know, I don't know how much people are going to be parlaying Umar Nurmagomedov at like -1,200, but people probably will be throwing him in parlays. Some people will. So, you know, if Nate Maness were to get up to like +750, +800, I might have to take a shot on him. You know, I just have to take those shots sometimes when they're there. You know, maybe it's a degen choice, but things can go wrong. And like I said, Maness isn't a total scrub. I think Umar probably does blow him out of there, but you know, weird things happen sometimes. And when you can get +700, +800, sometimes you got to give it a shot. So we'll see. So yeah, I'm absolutely picking Umar to win, probably inside the distance. I won't even be surprised if Umar goes out there and knocks Maness out or submits him in the first round. That seems quite live to me. Next up, we've got Thiago Moises versus Christos Giagos, and I am actually going to remember to give you the odds before I start talking about the fight. Moises, pretty big favorite at -225. Comeback on Giagos at +215. Thiago Moises is 5-4 in the UFC. and that's if you include his win on Contender Series. He was KO'd quickly by Joel Alvarez in his last fight, but in the fight before that, he was pretty competitive with Islam Makhachev, which, I mean, if you can be competitive with him, that's pretty impressive. Giagos is 5-5 in the UFC. He's had two separate stints in the UFC. He was in the UFC years ago and then left and then was brought back. These are takedown stats. I was trying to understand my notes here. He has fights in which he's 6 for 13, 5 for 10, and 5 for 15 on takedowns. So so looking at that again, he's attempted 13, 10, and 15. So I mean, he's a guy who will attempt many takedowns in a fight. So he's averaging more than 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. 3 takedowns landed. Like I mentioned, Moises got whooped by Joel Alvarez his last time out, which was awesome. Because again, I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit here. I did bet Alvarez at plus 200 in that fight, so I was excited to see that happen. But like I said, in the previous fight, Moises was pretty competitive against Islam Makhachev before getting finished. I think it was in the 4th round. You know, he even looked good in clinches with Makhachev. He was able to pick Makhachev up and slam him I think it was in round 2. You know, Moises is quick. He moves well. He has quick hands. He throws leg kicks. He throws an overhand right. You'll see him use a jab to the body. You know, he's just an overall well-rounded fighter. He's got good strikes. He's got good wrestling. He's got good grappling. Giagos is also pretty well-rounded. But this is one of those spots where even though both guys are dangerous and both guys are well-rounded, I just lean toward thinking Moises is a little bit better than Giagos. You know, they both got well-rounded skills, but I think Moises might just be a little bit level up on those skills compared to Moises. And Giagos is also a guy that will slow down as the fight goes on. So if he's not really able to establish his game early, you know, I think he's going to start to slow down and Moises is going to start to take over. That's my read on it. And Giagos has also faced overall, for the most part, like lower level competition. You know, Moises has wins against guys like Bobby Green and Michael Johnson, who are, you know, not like absolute top of the heap, but really skilled guys, really solid veterans that have been around for a long time and have kind of fought everybody. And, you know, the kind of guys that are they're wily and crafty and they've kind of seen it all and they know how to deal with it, you know? So, you know, I don't mind the price on Moises is kind of steep. I don't mind potentially using him in a parlay. And I have seen some people on Giagos as an underdog. And, you know, I can understand that too. Because like I said, I do think that these guys are somewhat evenly matched, but I just think Moises is going to be a little bit better everywhere. And, you know, I could be wrong about that. Giagos absolutely could win here. You know, I can see the argument for there being value on him as an underdog, but I am personally going Moises, and I don't mind him as a parlay piece. Next up, we've got Josh Parisian versus Alain Baudot. I don't even know what to say about this fight. I'm not going to say much about it because I just don't have much interest. And this is coming from me, the guy who loves sloppy, low-level heavyweight MMA more than anyone. If you guys have watched my videos before, you've probably heard me say this. Heavyweight is my favorite division, and I don't think anybody feels that way. Most people are like, oh, bantamweight or featherweight or lightweight. You know, like, I love heavyweight. I love heavyweight fights. I love heavyweight fighters. I always have. And even sloppy low-level heavyweight fights I usually love, and I'm just not interested in this fight. So that tells you everything you need to know about it. This is about as low-level as you can get in the UFC's heavyweight division right now, I would say. I have a couple talking points I typed out here. I'm going to go through those, and then that's all I'm going to say about it. I think Baudot should be the better striker at range, but Parisian does have a solid chin, and he's got better striking output. I think Parisian can probably clinch and cage push Baudot if he wants to. You know, Parker Porter had quite a bit of success doing that against Baudot. I do think this is kind of Parisian's fight to lose if he pressures Baudot and makes it ugly and keeps him uncomfortable and keeps him on his heels. But yeah, I don't know. That's really about all I have to say about this one. What are the odds? It's pretty close. Baudot minus 111, Josh Parisian plus 100. I'm not interested in betting anything in this fight. It's so low level and so sloppy that, like, but yeah, as a basic read, it's kind of like if they stay at distance, Baudot is the better striker, but he just doesn't always have a lot of output. I think Parisian should be able to cage push him and make it dirty. You know, Parisian will throw elbows and uppercuts and stuff in close, potentially look for takedowns. You know, not that Parisian is an excellent wrestler or anything, but I think, you know, he might be able to get takedowns here. Yeah, I'm struggling for something interesting to say about this fight, and I just don't have it. The line is close, and I think for a reason. If I was gonna bet it, I'd probably bet Parisian, but I'm staying away, and I recommend you do too. I mean, do what you want. I always say, and this is a good time to give my disclaimer. I always say, I am not any kind of betting expert. I'm not a professional gambler. I don't even claim to be especially good at this. I'm just a longtime fight fan who likes betting on fights, likes to talk about betting on fights. So like when I'm telling you the bets that I'm making, I'm simply telling you what I'm doing with my money. I'm not telling you what you should do with yours. So I don't usually consider the things I say to be advice of any kind, but I'm going to go ahead and make it advice on that one. Don't bet on Parisian versus Bodo. There you go. I broke my little rule of not giving advice and gave some. But anyway, next up, we've only got 2 fights left. We've got Neil Magny versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. This is an exciting fight. You know, like you always love to see this. This is kind of that spot. You know, Shavkat obviously is one of the, you know, most blue chip prospects in the UFC right now. You know, besides Khamzat, he's maybe a step down from Khamzat as far as like how much everybody is believing in him and what we're going to see from him. But, you know, he's almost right up there. Like he's 3-0 in the UFC, all 3 ending before the 3rd round. He's gotten everybody out of there. If you count his fights on Tough, I think Magny is 21-9 in the UFC. I might have done the math wrong on that, but he's had like 30 UFC fights anyway. So he's absolutely a very, very seasoned veteran who's been in there with a lot of, you know, a variety of different fighters. He's been able to beat some pretty high level fighters. He's been beaten by some pretty high level fighters. You know, he's one of those guys who's like just never quite been able to be in that very, very top elite, but he's right there, you know, like he's always kind of hanging out on the fringes. And so it's always fun when you see, you know, this is the spot. This is kind of, in a way, this is kind of the spot, not quite, because Burns was a little bit higher level as far as his ranking and that sort of thing. But it's almost a little bit like when Khamzat fought Burns, you know, like when you've got the prospect who he's gotten some really impressive wins over some somewhat lower level competition, and now it's time to step up and test him against a more solid, higher level vet. That's kind of what we're seeing here. Although Magny is, you know, maybe not quite on the level of where Burns is at, but still, this is a pretty significant step up against a well-rounded vet who's kind of been there, done that, seen it all. So I'm just looking at my notes here. I've probably already said a bunch of the things that I was going to say. Oh, another thing about Shavkat, he's had 15 pro fights. He's finished all 15 opponents. I mean, how often do we see that? So yeah, he finished 12 opponents outside the UFC. He gets into the UFC. He finishes all 3 of his opponents in the UFC so far. And, you know, I've heard a lot of cappers. I've heard a lot of people's breakdowns saying that, you know, Magny is super tough. He's super tough to finish. The thing is, Magny has lost. Magny is like, I don't know. I have this typed up somewhere. I believe Magny has lost 9 times in the UFC, and I think he's been finished 7 of those times. So, I mean, yeah, Magny's a tough fighter to beat. You got to be a good fighter to beat Magny. But when Magny loses, he's usually getting finished. You know, so I think people are saying that he's tough and hard to finish simply because he's known as a fighter who goes to decision a lot, and he almost always wins when he goes to decision. He's won a ton of decisions, but when he does lose, he does get finished. And Shavkat being a guy who's finished 15 fighters in a row, you know, that's something to think about. And one big difference between these two, I think, is that, like I said, Shavkat, he's finished 15 in a row. Shavkat is a fighter who brings that danger. And Magny is a guy who more often than not, when he wins, he goes to decision. Magny is a good fighter. He's not a particularly dangerous fighter. So that's kind of 2 different things here. Like Shavkat's a guy who's going to come out. He's going to hurt you. He's going to finish you. He's going to get you out of there. Magny's a guy who's going to come out. He's going to stick and move. He's going to outstrike you. He's going to try to clinch up with you. He's going to try to outgrapple you. You know, he's not going to get you out of there. He's just going to try to outfight you. And so, you know, the betting lines on this fight are Shavkat is -390, Magny +320. And I think you can argue that line is wide, simply because, yes, Shavkat is a blue chip prospect, but he's getting a big step up here against a wily veteran in Magny. I do think that Shavkat probably will be able to finish Magny. That's my, like, if I gun to my head, if I have to make a pick of what happens in this fight, I'll say that I think Shavkat probably does get the finish here. However, Neil Magny can be had by decision. His decision prop is at like plus 500. If Shavkat can't get Neil Magny out of there and the fight does go to decision, is it going to surprise you if Neil Magny squeaks out a greasy split decision here? Because it's not going to surprise me at all. So that's a spot, another one that I haven't bet yet, but I may end up putting a little something on Magny by decision here because, yeah, if Shavkat can't finish him, I absolutely could see Magny potentially getting a decision. But yeah, and I've been trying to stay away from betting a lot of these low percentage props because looking through my record lately, I won't get into this too much, but looking, I've been on a little bit of a rough skid lately, and I looked through my record and did some digging and kind of figuring as far as like, okay, what's the deal here? I was winning consistently early, and lately I haven't been doing that well, and it's the props that are killing me. I would have won, I forget now exactly, but I would have won like the last 6 events in a row if I had only bet straight money lines and parlays. The prop bets are what are killing me. So I'm trying to stay away from them, but then I see this, Magny by decision at plus 500. If you've got a book that has Magny by split decision, I bet you can get an awesome line there. I bet that's over, plus 1,000. I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm like, man, I'm trying not to bet those spots, but yeah, so we'll see. I don't know if I'll get there or not, but Shavkat inside the distance is at like minus 160. And again, that's one of those spots where I don't love playing a prop like that without a plus sign in front of it, but I do think Shavkat inside the distance is a pretty likely outcome here, so I don't hate a shot on that. But yeah, pick-wise, I like Shavkat to win here, probably inside the distance, but I don't mind potentially a shot on that Neil Magny by decision at plus 500. Not sure if I'm going to bet it myself. I said I was going to do this video really quickly, and I'm not getting through it as quickly as I wanted, but that's okay because we've only got one fight left. The main event, the headliner, Arman Tsarukyan versus Mateusz Gamrot. Go through some stats here. Arman lost his UFC debut to Islam Makhachev by decision in 2019, and he's won 5 in a row since then. The first 3 by decision, and then the last 2 were by stoppage. Gamrot lost his UFC debut to Guram Kutadalads by split decision, and he's won 3 in a row since. 2 by stoppage to strikes and 1 by submission, which was a Kimura over Jeremy Stevens. That happened really quickly. Gamrot is credited with 100% takedown defense, but that's actually only on 2 attempts. He's only got 2 attempts against him credited in the UFC. Doing the tape on this fight, one thing that I noticed, one thing that I really love about Arman Tsarukyan is he will get the fight to the ground immediately if he feels like that's his best path. In the fights that I watched, he, in pretty much every round even really, like he will shoot, I think in pretty much every fight I watched, he'll shoot a takedown within the first 30 seconds in the first round. If it goes to the second round, he'll do it again in the second round. If it goes to the third round, he'll do it again in the third round. If he feels that wrestling is his best bet, because how often do we see a fighter where they're a good wrestler, wrestling is probably their way to win the fight, but they just don't do it, or they wait too long. They wait till halfway through the round. They wait till the end of the round, and it's like, why didn't you wrestle earlier? Tsarukyan does not have that problem. He will shoot his first takedown within the first 20 30 seconds of the fight and of the round, and I love to see that. So that's one thing that I noticed that I really, really liked. Arman has fast hands. He hits hard. He has excellent top control and ground and pound with punches and elbows. He's tenacious with the chain takedowns when he gets in on the hips. Like I said, like he's one of those guys that I love to see, that where if his first takedown attempt isn't successful, he'll keep chaining, he'll keep attempting. And like I said with Durden, he's the kind of guy that if he gets you down and you get back up, he'll keep holding that body lock. He'll keep working for it. So he shoots early and he keeps going for it. And I love to see that. Also, Tsarukyan is only 25 years old. It's hard not to think that we're seeing a pretty special fighter if we keep that in mind. Just look at what he's been capable of already so far. He's only 25. He's still going to be getting better. He's still like 5 years away from reaching his prime even. Like he's a guy who I think is pretty special. And this is a spot, and Gamrot is a very good prospect as well. And this is a fight where, where they're at, I think they're both like probably right on the fringes of the top 10 or so. Whoever wins this fight is going to find themselves against a pretty big name opponent next. This is an important fight. Like, it makes sense that it's the main event here, because this is a spot where somebody's going to be jumping up into, the elite or pretty close. Mateusz Gamrot is also a really solid fighter everywhere, but this is one of the spots where I lean toward thinking that Tsarukyan is just a little bit better. That there's levels to this kind of thing, and Gamrot might prove me wrong. I'm not trying to, undersell the guy, but Gamrot is a very solid prospect that a lot of people are behind, and I understand that. And I feel like Tsarukyan is like maybe just a little bit higher. So the on the odds here, Tsarukyan can be had for like minus 250. He's even up minus 300 in spots. Gamrot can be had for plus 250. And I've seen arguments that line is wide, and considering that they are both really solid fighters everywhere and both really solid prospects on the come up, I do think that you can argue that the line is a little bit wide, but I do also like Arman to win here. I think he should be able to get the takedowns. I think he probably has better cardio. And, Gamrot doesn't gas badly, but he's one of those fighters who he'll noticeably have less pop on his punches and less explosion on his takedown attempts later in the fight. He's not like a total gas bag who's breathing with his mouth open. But, just the punches come a little more slowly. The takedown attempts aren't as explosive. He gets a little bit easier to read, just kind of slows down a little bit and that sort of thing. So I do like Arman Tsarukyan to win here. And I did bet him here. Actually, this is a good spot to go ahead and just transition into taking a look at the bets that I've got for this card. You know what? Hold on. I was going to share. Okay, here we go. I was going to share my screen and show you this. I haven't used the share screen thing in a while, so I should have been more prepared for this. I rarely do these streams by myself where I share my screen. Let's see. Am I doing this right? There we go. All right. So, I just wanted to go through. There's some Bellator and stuff. There's my bets for this card right there. And that's probably too small to see, huh? I'll make that a little bit. Whoa, way too big. There, that's better. All right. So, the bets I've got so far, I did put 3 units on Arman Tsarukyan at minus 250. I put a unit on Shavkat at minus 400. That was one of those spots where I was like, do I want to bet that? I don't know. So I just went really tiny on it. I put 2 units on Rodolfo Vieira at plus 140. I don't know. I might end up regretting that because, like I said, I'm not super confident in him to win there. But I looked at that line and I was like, screw it. I'm going with 2. We'll see how it goes. I put a unit on Carlos Ulberg at minus 112, and I put a unit on Cody Durden at plus 102. I also parlayed Rachmanov and Moises at minus 122 for a unit. And then I've got that Demopoulos scorecards no action 1 unit at plus 190. So that's everything I've got so far. Like I said, there are still a couple spots that I'm looking at. Keep an eye on my Bet MMA tips. That's betmma.tips/Erik Block. I believe the link is down there. Thanks so much for watching with me, folks. Like, I hope I had some helpful information for you there. Like I said, there were some fights that I don't have a great read on. Quite a few fights where I don't feel super confident in a pick, but hopefully there's still some information there that can help you make better betting decisions. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure that you like and throw a comment down there. Even if you don't have anything to say, comments obviously help us get the algorithm going and that kind of thing. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to Never Hedge Media. Make sure you check out Never Hedge Media on Twitter, on Instagram. We're starting to work on TikTok now. All those links should be down in the description as well. You can also find me. If you like the things that I do, check out my personal YouTube channel, which is Erik Bets Fights. That link is down there. You can check out my Instagram, my Twitter, all that sort of thing. All that stuff is in the description below this video, or should be if I remembered to put it down there. I think I did. Anyway, I am Erik with Erik Bets Fights and Never Hedge Media, reminding you to play it smart, play it tight, and let's grow those bankrolls, everybody. Enjoy the fights at UFC Vegas 57 this weekend, and we'll see you next time.